All right, today I want to make another studying stream and talk about the 10th paragraph of Nietzsche's book Beyond Good and Evil. As usual, before to get into it, I'd like to recite the entire previous no, part. The preface, today I'm going to recite the preface since it's been a month from the time when I did it, not the last time. And now I'd like to recite the entire thing. So let's do it. Preface. Supposing that truth is a woman, what then? Is there no ground for suspecting that all philosophers, insofar as they have been dogmatists, have failed to understand women? The terrible seriousness and clumsy importunity with which they have usually pet their addresses to truth have been only unskillful and unseemly methods for winning a woman. Certainly, she has never allowed herself to be won, and at present, every kind of dogma stands with sad and discouraged mien, if indeed it stands at all, for there are scoffers who maintain that it has fallen, that all dogma lies on the ground, nay more, that it is at its last gasp. But to speak seriously, there are good grounds for hoping that all dogmatizing philosophy, whatever solemn, whatever decisive and conclusive airs it has assumed, might have been only a noble tyrannism and pluralism. And probably the time is at hand when it will be once and again understood what has actually sufficed for the basis of such imposing and absolute philosophical edifices which philosophers have hitherto reared. Perhaps some popular superstition of immemorial times, like soul superstition or the ego superstition, which in the form of subject has not yet ceased doing mischief. Perhaps some play upon words, a deception on the part of grammar, or an audacious generalization of very restricted, very personal, very human, all too human facts. The philosophy of the dogmatists, it is to be hoped, was only a promise for thousands of years afterwards, as was astrology in still earlier times, in service of which perhaps more labor, gold, acuteness, and patience have been spent than on any actual science hitherto. We owe to it and its superterrestrial pretensions in Asia and Egypt the grand style of architecture. It seems that in order to inscribe themselves upon the heart of humanity with everlasting claims, all great things have first to wander about the earth as enormous and awe-inspiring caricatures. Dogmatic philosophy has been a caricature of this kind, namely the Vedanta, for instance, the Vedanta doctrine in Asia and Platonism in Europe. Let us not be ungrateful to it, although it must certainly be confessed that the worst, the most tiresome, and the most dangerous of errors hitherto has been a dogmatist error, namely Plato's invention of pure spirit and good in itself. But now, when it has been surmounted and Europe can again draw breath freely and at least enjoy a healthier sleep, we whose duty is wakefulness itself are the heirs of all the strength that the struggle against this error has fostered. It amounted to the very inversion of truth, to speak of spirit and the good as Plato spoke of them. Indeed, one might ask as a physician, how did such a malady attack that finest product of antiquity, Plato? Had the wicked Socrates really corrupted him? Was Socrates, after all, the corrupter of youth and deserved his hemlock? But the struggle against Plato, or to speak plainer and for the people, the struggle against ecclesiastical oppressions of millenniums of Christianity, for Christianity's Platonism for the people, produced in Europe a magnificent tension of soul, such that had never existed anywhere previously. With such a tensely strained bow, one can now aim at the furthest goals. As a matter of fact, the European feels this tension as a state of distress, and twice attempts in the grand style have been made to unbend the bow, once by means of Jesuitism and the second by means of democratic enlightenment, which with the aid of liberty of the press might in fact bring about that this spirit would not so easily find itself in distress. Germans invented gunpowder, all credit to them, but they again made things square. They invented printing. But we who are neither Jesuits nor Democrats, nor even sufficiently Germans, we good Europeans and free, very free spirits, we have it still, all the distress of spirit and all the tension of its bow, and perhaps also the error, the duty, and who knows, the goal to aim at. Upper and Guardian, Sils Maria, 1885. Chapter 1. The Prejudice of Philosophers. 1. The will to truth, which is to tempt us to many a hazardous enterprise. The famous truthfulness, of which all philosophers have hitherto spoken with respect. What questions has this will to truth not laid before us? What strange, perplexing, questionable questions? It's already a long story, yet it seems as if it were hardly commenced. Is it any wonder that we at last grow distrustful, lose patience, and turn impatiently away? That this Sphinx at last teaches us to ask questions ourselves? Who is it really that puts questions to us here? What is really this will to truth in us? In fact, we made a long halt at the question as to the origin of this will, until we came to an absolute standstill before a yet more fundamental question. We inquired about the value of this will. Granted that we want the truth, why not rather untruth and uncertainty, even ignorance? The problem of the value of truth presented itself before us, or was it we who presented ourselves before the problem? Which of us is the Oedipus here? Which the Sphinx? It would be a rendezvous of questions and notes of interrogation, and could it be believed that it at last seems to us as if the problem had never been propounded before, as if we were the first to discern it, get a sight of it, and risk raising it, for there is risk in raising it. Perhaps there is no greater risk. 2. How could anything originate out of its opposite? For example, truth out of error, or the will to truth out of the will to deception, or the generous deed out of selfishness, or the sun-bright vision of the wise man out of covetousness. Such genius is impossible, whoever dreams of it is a fool, nay, worse than a fool. Things of the highest value must have a different origin, an origin of their own. In this transitory, seductive, illusory, paltry world, in this turmoil of delusion and cupidity, they cannot have their source, but rather in the intransitive, in the lap of being, and the God, in the concealed God, in the thing in itself. There must be their source and nowhere else. Such mode of reasoning discloses a typical prejudice by which metaphysicians of all times can be recognized. This mode of valuation is at the back of all their logical procedures. Through this belief of theirs, they exert themselves to their knowledge, to something that in the end solemnly christened the truth. The fundamental belief of metaphysicians is the belief in the antithesis of values. It never occurred even to the wariest of them to doubt here on the very threshold, where doubt, however, is most necessary, though they had made a solemn vow, the omnibus dimitandum. For it may be doubted, firstly, that the antithesis exists at all, and secondly, that the popular valuations and the antithesis of values are not merely superficial estimates and provisional perspectives. Besides probably being made from some corner, perhaps from below, Baroque perspectives, as it were, to borrow an expression current among painters. In spite of all the value that may belong to the truth, the positive and the unselfish, it might be possible that a higher and more fundamental value, generally for life, should be assigned to pretense, to the will to delusion, to selfishness and cupidity. It might even be possible that what constitutes those good and respected things consists precisely in their being insidiously related, knotted, crocheted to these evil and apparently opposed things, perhaps being essentially identical with them, perhaps, but who wishes to concern himself with such dangerous perhapses? For that investigation, one must await the advent of a new order of philosophers, such as will have other tastes and inclinations, the reverse of those hitherto prevalent. Philosophers of the dangerous, perhaps in any sense of the term. And to speak in all seriousness, I see such philosophers beginning to appear. 3. Having kept a sharp eye on philosophers and having read between their lines for long enough, I now say to myself that the greater part of the conscious thinking must be counted among the instinctive functions. And it is so even in the case of philosophical thinking. One has here to learn anew as one learned anew about heredity and innateness. As little as the act of birth comes into consideration in the whole process and procedure of heredity, just as little being conscious is opposed to the instinctive in any decisive sense. The greater part of the conscious thinking of a philosopher is secretly influenced by his instincts and forced into definite channels. And behind all logic and its seeming sovereignty of movement, there are valuations, or to speak more plainly, physiological demands for the maintenance of a definite mode of life. For example, that the certain is worth more than certain, that illusion is less valuable than truth. Such valuations, in spite of their regulatory importance for us, might notwithstandingly be only superficial valuations. Some types of stupidity which might be necessary for the maintenance of species such as ourselves, supposing in effect that man is not just the measure of things. 4. The falseness of an opinion is not for us any objection to it. It is here, perhaps, that our new language sounds most strangely. The question is, how far is an opinion life furthering, life preserving, species preserving, perhaps even species rearing? And we are fundamentally inclined to believe that the falsest opinions, to which synthetic judgments a priori belong, are the most indispensable for us. That without a recognition of logical fictions, without a comparison of reality with the purely imagined world of the absolute and immutable, without a constant counterfeiting of the world by means of numbers, man could not live. That renunciation of false opinions would be the renunciation of life, the negation of life. To recognize untruth as the condition of life, that is certainly to impugn the traditional ideas of value in a dangerous manner. And philosophy, which ventures to do so, has thereby alone placed itself beyond good and evil. 5. That which causes philosophers to be regarded half distrustfully and half mockingly is not the oft-repeated discovery how innocent they are, how often and easily they make mistakes and lose their way, in short, how childish and childlike they are, but that there is not enough honest dealing with them, whereas they all raise a loud and virtuous outcry when the problem of truthfulness is even hinted at in the remotest manner. They all pose as though their real opinions have been discovered and arrived through the self-evolving of a cold, pure, divinely indifferent dialectic. In contrast to all sorts of mystics who are fairy and foolish are talk of inspiration. Whereas, in fact, a prejudiced proposition, opinion, or suggestion, which is generally their heart's desire, abstracted and refined, is defended by them with the arguments sought after they went. They all are advocates who do not wish to be regarded as such. Generally astute defenders also of their prejudices, which they dub truths, and very far from having the conscience which bravely admits this to itself, very far from having the good taste of the courage, which goes so far as to let this be understood, perhaps to warn friend or foe, or in cheerful confidence in self-ridicule. The spectacle of the tartuffery of old Kant by which he entices us into the dialectic by ways that lead, or more correctly, mislead, to his categorical imperative, makes us fastidious ones smile. We who find no small amusement in spying out the subtle tricks of the old moralists and ethical preachers. Or still more so, the hocus pocus, by means of which Spinoza, as it were, has clad his philosophy in mail and mask, in fact, the truth of his wisdom, to translate the term fairly and squarely, in order to strike terror into the heart of the assailant who should dare to cast a glance on that invincible maiden, that Pallas Athena. How much of personal timidity and vulnerability does the masquerade of a sickly reckless betray? 6. It has gradually become clear to me what every great philosophy has consisted of, namely the confession of its originator and a species of involuntary and unconscious autobiography. And moreover, that the moral or immoral purpose in every philosophy has constituted the true vital germ out of which the entire plant has always grown. Indeed, to understand how the abstrusest metaphysical assertions of a philosopher have been arrived at, it is always well and wise to first ask oneself, what morality do they or does he aim at? Accordingly, I do not believe that an impulse to knowledge is the father of philosophy, but rather that the other impulse has only made use of knowledge and mistaken knowledge as an instrument. But whoever considers the fundamental impulses of man with a view to determining how far they might have here acted as inspiring genii or as demons or kobolds, will find that they all have practiced philosophy at one time or another, that each one of them would have been only too glad to look upon itself as the ultimate end of existence and the legitimate lord over all the other impulses. For each impulse is imperious and as such attempts to philosophize. To be sure, in the case of scholars, in the case of a really scientific man, it may be otherwise. Better, if you will. There may really be such thing as an impulse to knowledge, some small independent clockwork, which, when well wound up, works away industriously to that end, without the rest of the scholarly impulses taking any material part therein. The actual interests of the scholar, therefore, are generally in quite another direction. In family, perhaps, or in money making, or in politics. It is, in fact, almost indifferent at what point of research his little machine is placed and whether the hopeful young worker becomes a good philologist or a mushroom specialist or a chemist. He's not characterized by becoming this or that. In philosophy, on the contrary, it is there's absolutely nothing impersonal. And above all, his morality furnishes the decisive and decided testimony as to who he is. That is to say, in what order the deepest impulses of his nature stand to each other. 7. How malicious philosophers can be. I know nothing of more stinging than the joke Epicurus that took liberty of making on Plato and Platonists. He called them Dionysioclakas. In its original sense and on the surface of it, the word signifies flatterers of Dionysius. Consequently, tyrant accessories and league spittles. Besides this, however, it is as much as to say they are all actors. There's nothing genuine about them. For Dionysioclax was a popular name for an actor. The latter is the really malignant reproach that Epicurus cast upon Plato. He was annoyed by the grandiose manner, the mise-en-scène style, of which Plato and his scholars were masters, of which Epicurus was not a master. He, the old school teacher of Samos, who sat concealed in his little garden at Athens and wrote 300 books, perhaps out of rage and ambitious envy of Plato, who knows? Greece took 100 years to find out who the garden god Epicurus really was. Did she ever find out? 8. There's a point in every philosophy at which the conviction of the philosopher comes on the scene. Or to put it in the words of an ancient mystery, adventavit asinus, pulcher, and fortissimus. 9. You desire to live according to nature. Oh, you noble Stoics, what fraud of words. Imagine to yourself a being like nature, boundlessly extravagant, boundlessly indifferent, without purpose or consideration, without pity or justice. At once, fruitful and barren and uncertain. Imagine to yourselves indifference as a power. How could you live in accordance with such indifference? To live is not that endeavoring to be otherwise than this nature. It's not living, valuing, preferring, being limited, being unjust, endeavoring to be different. And granted that your imperative means actually the same, and granted that your imperative, living according to nature, means actually the same as living according to life, how could you do differently? Why should you make a principle out of what you yourselves are and must be? In reality, however, it's quite otherwise with you. While you pretend to read with rapture the canon of your law in nature, you want something quite the contrary. You extraordinary stage players and self-deluders. In your pride, you wish to dictate your morals and ideals to nature herself, and incorporate them therein. You insist that it shall be nature according to the Stoa, and would, as everything, be made after your own image, as a vast, eternal generalization, glorification and generalism of Stoicism, with all your love for truth. You have forced yourselves so long, so persistently, and with such hypnotic rigidity to see nature falsely, that you are no longer be able to see it otherwise. And to crown all, some unfathomable superciliousness gives you the bedlamite hope that because you are able to tyrannize over yourselves, Stoicism is self-tyranny, the nature will also allow yourselves to be tyrannized over. It's not the Stoic a part of nature, but this is an old and everlasting story. What happened in old times with the Stoics still happens today. As soon as ever a philosophy begins to believe in itself, it always creates the world after its own image. It cannot do otherwise. Philosophy is this tyrannical impulse itself, the most spiritual will to power, the will to creation of the world, the will to causa prima, to de causa prima. Wow. It gets more interesting. So every time when I record a studying stream, and especially when I repeat the text in my mind, I always see something new. And it's so surprising, like it provides me with such brilliant insights. And yeah, recently, a few days ago, I wrote an interesting poem, which, maybe a sort of reflection on what's influence has been made on me by by this book and by this exercise. So the book itself, of course, is not as important as the exercise, since I'm building certain neural paths in my in my brain by remembering a text, which is very hard thing to do for an ordinary person, unless he or she doesn't have certain doesn't dedicated, unless she or he has not dedicated a certain amount of time to training. So it's very hard to do. And yet when you develop many, when you just take one piece of text and keep it in mind for a long period of time, like for a couple of months or for half a year, and you always add something new, you build a structure, and then the structure basically you may apply it for anything else. Like for me now, I see it how I may now to remember the text, the passage, or these 10 paragraphs which I memorized in the last few months. It usually takes just 20 minutes, and it's not too hard. But the idea is that then when I it's like doing certain physical exercises. So it's like a heavy, you lift heavy weight, and then you may take usual, weight, and it doesn't weigh anything for you. I mean, it's the same as you may, run fast, and then after running a long distance, you stop and walk. And walking is not difficult at all. So no matter how much you may walk, you may just, you may get tired after like walking 10 kilometers. But if you, for example, run 10 kilometers and then you shift to walking, walking is not difficult at all. So the same, it's like the same may be projected here on this all mental, linguistical exercises. So you try to remember, it's hard, but you get used to it, and eventually, like you can, first of all, you can memorize it much easier. So the more you learn, the easier it is for you to memorize. But later, it's also when you just watch a lecture or you have a certain experience of a conversation, you create a natural capacity to keep in mind the entire conversation, even if it lasts for a couple of hours. So for me now, I have my speaking clubs, 2 clubs a week. And after conducting them, I go home, and at the next morning, I sit and write down everything that was going on in the conversation. And the more I do that, the better I can make a picture of the entire conversation in my imagination. So for now, for example, the last conversation, I made a poem out of this conversation. And while I was making a poem, I could able to keep the entire conversation in mind, not just one big picture, but essentially it was like I could reproduce probably 70% of it. Like not, of course, in the same words as, people uttered at the conversation, but basically I may place myself back in the conversation and get through all its steps. So I may, okay, there was an introduction, everybody said like this man said this man said that, and I basically may track the entire introduction. Then I can remember questions which I started asking. Then I remember who answered this question. Then I remember all this dynamic of a conversation. And of course, I don't write down the entire conversation. I try to distinguish some important moments. And in poetry, I make up 80%, but no, I try to make it kind of fascinating. But anyway, so the idea is this exercise is extremely powerful. And I'm talking generally about memory here. So it's like practicing memory. You take a certain text. It must be a long text. So you can't memorize. You can memorize some songs, or you can memorize some, some poems, but it's not as powerful as when you take a long text and you work on your memory for a long time. So you basically take the same neural path and you lengthen it like further and further. And it creates, like, I can't even talk about it now. It's like, it's very hard to find the suitable analogy to explain what I mean. But yeah, I guess I'll clarify it later, especially in poems. Yeah, I discovered that this urge to write poetry, it gets stronger and stronger in me. It was suppressed for 4 years. So while I was studying English, I almost didn't write poetry. And now I see that English itself was a sort of activity, sort of behavior, which helped me to suppress this urge. At 2016, before I shifted to English, and by the way, there's so many, like now I can see it so clearly. So there was like how I started studying English and how I got to this speaking club. I went to a poetry meeting. So there was in a cafe, there was poetry reading, and there was lots of people. And I also read a poem there, even though I didn't intend to do that. But I had some poems, and there was a free microphone at the end of the event. And I went on the scene and recited one of my latest poems. But anyway, there I met a girl. She read her poems, and I liked her. And basically, I was like, well, yeah, I kind of fell in love with her almost immediately. And then I found her on social media. I wrote her something like, actually, I wrote a book about this entire enterprise, but now I haven't published it since I haven't finished the book. So I wrote 300 pages, and now it's still, I can't get back to Russian to finish the book and publish it, but probably I'll do that in, next few years, or maybe not, or maybe I'll translate the book in English first and then publish it. Anyway, so there was this girl, and it was, for me now, I see it was a clear transition from poetry to English. So before I met her, I was basically studying poetry, and poetry didn't help me to win her love. I wrote her many poems, and great ones. And I used my language, my Russian language, to get in touch with her, and it didn't work. And she invited me to her speaking club, and I, like, most of this was going on for it was the whole, the first stage of this was going on in between March of 2016 to summer, like probably to the end of May of 2016, and I was basically the entire spring. The beginning of March, 6 March, we met, and at the end of May, I lapsed into playing video games, being dissatisfied with what happened. So poetry didn't help me to win this girl. And before, I wanted to quit poetry, since I wanted to do it somewhere around the middle of 2015. I was highly influenced by Pisarev. I read his collected works, and especially I was influenced by his book, by his critique of Pushkin. The book is called Pushkin and Belinsky. And before reading this book, I also read, I also tried to criticize Pushkin, but I tried to mock his poems. So I took some of his poems and I rewrote them in a particular way, which kind of in a mocking way, kind of silly. But then I wrote a poem about Pushkin, also kind of a mocking poem. And later I discovered Pisarev, and wow, he basically confirmed my entire worldview. So I had this idea, but I couldn't express it. So I wanted to compete with Pushkin to some sense, but I was quite weak for that competition. But when I found Pisarev, it basically just blew up my mind, since he gave me an army of linguistic, entities to attack Pushkin. And I was, wow, this is so great. And then, well, by Pushkin, of course, I don't mean the real Pushkin. It's just my perception of a Pushkin, and basically it's my poetic urge itself. So for me, Pushkin, let's say, is the manifestation of poetry. And when I discovered that this poetic urge, became quite tyrannical in me, so I decided to fight with it. And eventually, again, as I said, fighting with Pushkin and with poetry itself, it was just fighting against my own instinct to write poetry, since I was really no, I like I liked most of what I wrote in poetry, but there was no any feedback. So basically what I wrote, I was writing for myself, that's for sure, but still, well, I published it everywhere on the internet, on my social networks, and I talked about it to my friends, and nobody gave a fuck. And then I finally said, okay, let's quit poetry. It doesn't work. Let's focus on philosophy and something else. And then I met this girl, and finally I made a transition from poetry to English, to linguistics. And now, this poem and what happened recently, few days ago, when I started writing this poem, I read Faust, an introduction to Faust, and the first two prologues, and probably the first 5 pages of Faust, of the beginning of the story itself. And I discovered something in myself. So my motivation, not motivated, English, it's very hard to express what you want to say. But anyway, so there was something in me which was suppressed, this poetry urge. And it was suppressed, even though I tried to write poetry for these 4 years. From time to time, I made some, nice poems which I liked, but they all weren't real. So most of them, they were kind of pretenses. And by real, I mean, in Russian, I often took real experience and conveyed it in words, in poems. Whereas here, it was mostly like irrelevant things. Few times I wrote poems about love when I was in a relationship. These things were a little bit like, they had some reality in them. But what I wrote yesterday, and I was writing this poem basically in 3 days. At the end of Sunday, the entire Monday, and the beginning of Tuesday. So I got in a certain mood. So I felt something that I haven't felt for years. And I was, wow, that's so amazing. Like now I know put how to put myself in this state. And it's so, and again, the poem itself, well, yeah, after I wrote it, I definitely sensed that it was one of the best things which I wrote in English. And then like writing these things brought certain motivation and certain, delight or, inspiration, whatever you may call it. But I was in such a mood that, I basically was like on the sky. So you just go and I may try to describe it. So I go and I have this purpose to convey certain experience in a poetic form. And the experience itself doesn't matter. What's really important is to create a suitable form and take some features from the experience and kind of, it's not about even the experience. So you connecting dots. So you take some dots from the experience, but essentially what's important is like your imagination, how you make it, like how you make a story out of it. And I had some duties on Sunday and Monday and on Tuesday, but outside of these duties, I was thinking most of the time about making this poem. So as soon as I didn't do my exercise or didn't write something, some accounts of the speaking clubs, I was thinking about making a poem. And essentially, I was in this state for probably like 5 or 7 hours during these 3 days. So the poem itself, I wrote for 7 hours. And all these 7 hours, you basically try to organize certain experience and put it in a special form. And you do that, you start from, sometimes it's just one line, and then you try to see how, like, what you can add to this line to make, like, to describe this experience. And often, like, I may go, for example, I went to the forest and ran there. So while I went to the forest for an hour, I was in the state, I didn't see anything around. So kind of the walking and all motor functions, which I performed like while walking, I didn't pay attention to it at all. I didn't pay attention to like what was going on around. Well, I paid attention to, traffic lights, not to be, hit by a car. But essentially, I was in my imagination, and the whole, like, the path from my home to the forest, it's like 40 minutes, 50 minutes. I was in one particular state, and I wrote like 5, 10, maybe not, from 5 to 10 lines, like during 50 minutes. And you take one line and you kind of see what's going to feed this line to, again, not just to describe the experience, but to make, to make something out of this experience. And sometimes you just not allow, like, you see this line fits, and then you make another line, and then another line, and some of them may not fit. You may get back and change the previous one. But essentially, it's like, to make one line, it takes from 5 to 10 minutes. Sometimes it's 15 minutes, and there are moments like insights. So you go and you try to, like, what fits here, and you just kind of compute all your previous background experience, and some imagination plays certain role here. And then finally, at some moment, wow, this is perfect. This is exactly what I was looking for. And you find this line, you put it there, it works perfectly, and you go on. And after like another 5-10 minutes, you find another line, which is brilliant, which just, as if the poem, it looks as if the poem is like, as if the poem were already what there, as if it existed before, and you just trying to find the, you just trying to find it, like you kind of, where are you looking for it? I don't know. It's very hard to describe. It's like in a dream. So a dream is a very similar example. So when you are asleep, when you are in a dream, you usually experience all these things in a dream. But then when you wake up, and often you can't remember it. And I practice lucid dreams and dream journaling and thinking about dreams, dream analysis. And often, you just start focusing your attention on the experience in a dream, and you ask yourself some questions like, okay, what was going on? What can I remember? It's like, was it about, like nature, or was it about, interactions with people, or was it about some science, or maybe it's about poetry, or maybe about this or that. And then suddenly, like you catch one, like you catch one dot, or something there, and then the entire experience just reveals itself, and you can remember like not just one thing, but the entire scene, and which can be described in like 3, 4, 5 pages if you have time to do that. And the same here. So you write a poem, and there's certain lines, you focus on them, and you see, wow, it's like you discover. And these lines, when you find these insights, basically they give so much dopamine to your brain. So they release an extraordinary amount of dopamine when you see that you discovered exactly the same line. And again, for me, the poem, how many lines here? It's like 8, 8, 8, 8, 5, 40, just 40 lines. Yeah, it's not too many. 8, 5, yeah, 40 lines. Just 40 lines. Really? Just 40 lines? Wait, 8, 16, 24, 32, 40. Oh no, it's like, say, okay, it's 48 lines, but still just 48 lines. So you discover these 48 lines, and for each line, your brain releases a huge amount of dopamine. And then when you make the poem, it's like when I finished it, I got so much, it's like pursuing a goal for a long period of time, and then actually achieving that goal. So, and again, usually when you achieve that goal, dopamine is no longer released. So your brain basically stops it, and you get back in the normal state. And it was the same, but for a certain period of time, you are in a kind of such a strange, like for me, as I said, when I finished the poem yesterday in the morning, I was walking for a couple of hours just to put myself back in normal state, since I was, again, like in the skies. So I was, wow, this is such an amazing thing. I finally awakened my, urge for poetry. Well, even though I hated it in Russian, maybe in English is going to work differently. I don't know. But anyway, let's get to Nietzsche. Yeah, I want to say that, I had today, for example, when I recited these 10, not 10, 9 paragraphs, and I did it before making a video, so it was my type of morning linguistic gymnastics. So before reading them here, I recited them earlier in the morning, and I came to the conclusion that writing, like philosophy, is consistent writing, and that's all. So you write consistently, but daily, consistent daily writing. So you write consistently. At some moment, you see that there, in your personality, there are certain different types of behavior. They all have different types of, they all struggle for power, and they all have claims for your attention. So, and then you see that they kind of form the deepest structures of your neurophysiological, deepest neurophysiological structures, and they kind of compete with each other all the time. And when you write it, like it's so clear. So there's like different types of behavior, have different styles, have different metaphors, and it's all grounded in your body and in your. Okay, I'm not going to talk about more, but that was kind of interesting. Just wanted to mention it. Of course, I'm not going to clarify it here since it's just a stream of consciousness, a stream of thoughts. Now what I'm doing, I'm just reading and trying to make sense of the paragraph. And again, it's kind of brainstorming, so I don't actually care too much about the exact meaning of what I'm saying here. I'm trying to be open-minded. I'm trying to pay attention to what I read. I'm trying to be present, and at the same time, I'm trying to be non-judgmental. So whatever I say, that's okay. That's my like the highest possible self-expression, which is available for me at this current moment. Probably next year I'll watch it and say that it was total rubbish. But now for me, it's the best thing I can produce. Anyway, let's go on. Today I'm going to read it fast since I were talking for too much and I didn't have too much, too much time. So I'm going to read the paragraph and then I'm going to read slowly each sentence. And if I find something that I will like to talk about, I probably linger on it. But essentially, I'm going to finish this passage at 10. Like the last time was going to be, the latest time is going to be 10:20. All right, the eagerness and subtlety, I should even say craftiness, with which the problem of the real and the apparent world is dealt with at present throughout Europe furnishes food for thought and attention. And he who hears only a will to truth in the background and nothing else cannot certainly boast of the sharpest ears. In rare and isolated cases, it may really have happened that such a will to truth, a certain extravagant and adventurous pluck, a metaphysician's ambition of the forlorn hope, has participated therein, that which in the end always prefers a handful of certainty to a whole cartload of beautiful possibilities. There may even be puritanical fantasies of conscience who prefer to put their last trust in a sure nothing rather than in uncertain something. But that is nihilism and the sign of a despairing morality weird soul, notwithstanding the courageous bearing such a virtue may display. It seems, however, to be otherwise with stronger and livelier thinkers who are still eager for life, in that they cite against appearance and speak superciliously of perspective. In what they rank the credibility of their own bodies about as low as the credibility of the ocular evidence that the earth stands still, and thus apparently allowing with complacency their securest possession to escape, for what does one at present believe in more firmly than in one's body? Who knows if they are not really trying to win back something which was formerly an even securer possession, something of the old domain of the faith of former times, perhaps the immortal soul, perhaps the old God, in short, ideas by which they could live better, that is to say, more vigorously and more joyously than by modern ideas. There is distrust of these modern ideas and this mode of looking at things, disbelief in all that has been constructed yesterday and today. There is perhaps some slight admixture of satiety and scorn. Satiety. Okay, let's check the word.
Satiety.
Satiety. All right. There is perhaps some slight admixture of satiety and scorn, which can no longer endure the bric-a-brac of ideas of the most varied origin, such as so-called positivism, at present throws on the market. A disgust of the more refined taste at the village fair motleyiness and patchiness of all these reality philosophers, in whom there is nothing either new or true except this motleyiness. Therein it seems to me that we should agree with those skeptical anti-realists and knowledge microscopists of the present day. Their instinct, which repels them from modern reality, is unrefuted. What do their retrograde bypaths concern us? The main thing about them is not that they wish to go back, but that they wish to get away therefrom. A little more strength, swing, courage, and artistic power, and they would be off and not back. Okay, let's deconstruct it. The eagerness and subtlety, I should even say craftiness, with which the problem of the real and the apparent world is dealt with at present throughout Europe, furnishes food for thought and attention. And he who hears only a will to truth in the background and nothing else cannot certainly boast about the sharpest ears. Okay, so I guess the central point in the sentence is will to truth, and he who hears only a will to truth cannot certainly boast about the sharpest ears. And another central point is the problem, with which the problem of real and the apparent world. So the problem of the real and the apparent world. What is the real and the apparent world? Well, it's a kind of Kantian world of things in themselves, and the world which we have an access to, which is the world of our thoughts or sensations, or the world which our brain makes for us. And this will to truth, which is the will to match the language and the real world, to match, as they call, condition of satisfaction. So there's, let's suppose the plant is green, right? This is a true sentence, since the plant or leaves of the plant are green. And it's true because there's such thing as greenness and in the plant and or leaves. And if what I say is if what I say describes the world in the way as it is, then it's true. And will to truth means basically you use your language to talk about truth. And science, it's all facts which we may find about the world which are true. So mathematics, truth about numbers. Biology, truth about life. Chemistry, truth about atoms and molecules. Psychology, truth about our, whatever they call psyche. But it's kind of fascinating. Yesterday and before yesterday, I watched lectures by George Lakoff, and I really like again, this idea of colors. I was studying skepticism quite recently, like this summer, and I had conversations about skepticism, and I read a book, The Outlines of Pyrrhonism, and there was like some sentence related to color, And I had not an argument, but I discussed like whether or not colors are real. And it seemed that it's very hard for people even now to understand that colors are not real things in the world. I mean, they're real, but they are not properties of the objects themselves. So color is made by our mind, as well as all this relationship between mind or brain and the object it sees. So without brain, it's like somebody may perceive it not as green as slight like women's and women and men, women and men have a slightly different perception of color. But if we talk about animals, so some animals can certainly see colors not in a slightly different way, but radically different. And the idea is, again, it's your eyes which make the color. And so truth, like if I say the leaves which I am looking at are green, it may be not the truth, like the ultimate truth. For me, it's true. For you, if you have the same vision as I have, you can see it as green too, and it may be true for us, but it doesn't mean that it's absolutely true. So it doesn't mean that there can't be other creatures who can see it as green or as blue or as orange or as any other color. There may be totally different colors. Like there may be creatures with their own colors. Imagine how many colors. Like why do we have colors at all? Like what if this spectrum, which we believe is the only possible spectrum of colors, what if there's infinite amount of such spectrums? There are like for some creatures from other planets or galaxies, which may develop their intelligence far further than we do. Like maybe for them there's billions of colors. Imagine that you are a creature who can perceive like not a billion, okay, 1,000 colors and distinguish everything in 1,000 colors. And your language, essentially, like when you look at the language, for example, what's beautiful about Nietzsche and his language? So there's if we project it on color, we may say that in Nietzsche, so there's infinite variety of colors in this language. So it's not just let's say if you take an average professor who writes books about philosophy, linguistics, whatever, they have probably like 5, 10, 15 colors, which they can use to describe their ideas, to develop their ideas, like some metaphors, whatever, 10, 15. And in Nietzsche, there are like 55 or 110 or whatever. And the idea is like colors in language, like every language may have different terms for color, and it's not only about different cultures and different languages, but every person may have really different range for colors, and the same for certain tones. And again, we're talking about truth here, and so the first sentence is that will to truth is not. Yeah, it's there's something more about the problem of the real and apparent than the will to truth. There's something bigger than that. Okay, so everybody, like not but people are. It's the same. No, it's the same case in modern science. Now I'm barely beginning to investigate what's going on in modern linguistics and philosophy. And it's funny. I mean, it's so funny. Anyway, in rare and isolated cases, it may really have happened that such a will to truth, a certain extravagant and adventurous pluck, this pluck, something familiar, I definitely know that, but unfortunately, it's not clear. I want to see pluck verb, but also noun, courage and determination. Oh, I like it, like courage and determination. Yeah, so pluck, for example, right? So how can you say like courage, right? but you may basically use the word pluck. And for all phenomena, like in Nietzsche, what I really love is like for every phenomena, he has like so many distinct words, which basically create metaphors and create certain, enrich your understanding of what he. It's not just he talks about philosophy in terms of you know something else. No, it's okay. It doesn't matter. So pluck, a certain extravagant and adventurous pluck, a metaphysician ambition of the forlorn hope. Forlorn, it's like it's kind of lost. What's this word means? Seeming lonely and unhappy. Okay, place that is forlorn seems empty and sad and is often in bad condition. A forlorn hope, attempt, or struggle is not going to be successful. Okay, yeah, I like this word, forlorn hope. Yeah, probably. Well, I'll memorize the entire passage, but yeah, now I was thinking probably it makes sense to write it down and put in my list of some phrases which I want to learn. But yeah, I'm going to memorize the entire passage. I shouldn't worry about individual words here. Anyway, adventurous pluck, a metaphysician ambition of the forlorn hope has participated therein, that which in the end always prefers a handful of certainty to a whole lot of beautiful possibilities. There may be even puritanical fantasies of conscience who prefer to put their last trust in a sure nothing rather than an uncertain something. Okay, what is this sentence about? Well, it basically adds to the first sentence. The first sentence, what's going on in this discourse about the real and apparent worlds? It's not just will to truth. So will to truth is, who hears only a will to truth in the background, and nothing else cannot certainly blast of the sharpest ears. So and then there's another sentence which extends the meaning of the first one. So in isolated and rare and isolated cases, it may really have been happened that such a will to truth has participated therein. So it may be that will to truth has something to do with this problem, the real and ideal, but it's like Nietzsche wants to say, it's just it's not the chief motive of the discourse. I like a will to truth, and then basically this whole, it's like an adjective, a certain extravagant and adventurous plot. It's not an adjective, it's I want to use special terms, grammatical terms. It's a clause, relative clause. Yeah, so he basically describes the will to truth. And I like all, now I'm working on my writing skill, and all this is so fruitful and so beneficial, like to see these structures, to be able to put, like now I definitely see how my writing improved after I started, as I mentioned earlier, after I started memorizing this book. Now there's so many constructions in my in my neuro structures, constructions, neurostructure. So in my brain, there are so many different ways to put certain sentences, and I guess it had a certain influence on my skill of writing poetry, since it's like so rich in terms of your ability to express, and even now, even in speech, I don't think in speech it had certain huge influence yet, but it'll have it in the future. But still, like in writing, when I have time to think, when I have an hour to make a one page, it's like I see a different way of expressing the same idea, and it's not just colorful way, it's not just the better way. It's basically, it changes the entire meaning. So I have an idea, I want to express it. If I directly say, whatever, John loves Mary. Okay, if I directly say John loves Mary, it doesn't actually, like, it's true, it's true. But if I say something like, John has the forlorn hope for achieving Mary's, heart, not achieving, but winning Mary's heart. And he is such a naive person that he believes that his feelings will influence the whatever of this young, beautiful girl. See, it's like, in one case, in both cases are true. One case, but which one of them like describes the reality? Is it the first sentence, John loves Mary, or is it like the second sentence? Or maybe it's like, you may construct as many sentences as you like, and after like constructing 500 of them, you'll probably just like find the best one, and it may suit your purposes. But if to suit your purposes, actually, like, it depends like on your purpose, so it can be taken out of the context. So if you are this John and you want to get Mary, it's better for you probably to to add something to John loves Mary. But if you are describing it, and if your goal is just to fix the moment, fix the condition, fix the the state of affairs, it probably makes sense to write John loves Mary. But again, depends on, do you think about your readers? If you think about your readers and if you want to entertain them, probably like it's not as wonderful to read John loves Mary as the second sentence. Anyway, yeah, what was there? Where was I? So in rare and isolated cases, will to truth has participated therein. That which in the end always prefers a handful of certainty to a whole cartload of beautiful possibilities. Yeah, and again, the same sentence, John loves Mary, like it's certain, but a whole cartload of beautiful possibilities. So you may express it in an endless variety of ways. And what is certain? Yeah, probably this, like, John loves Mary probably is the most certain thing. But do you really want to express a certain thing? I mean, in philosophy, let's talk about philosophy. So if you want to talk about philosophy, probably everything you may say is just one sentence. You see? So you may take the entire enterprise of, of human civilization, with languages, with arts, with anything, and say, all there is just one thing. Like, you may call it God, you may call it the universe, you may call it consciousness, but consciousness exists, let's say, or yeah, and that's all. Do you need to write 500 books about it, or do you need to make something like, some poems about it? It all depends. And like, what's going on, like, will to truth, probably will to truth is just one sentence, handful of a handful of certainty. And that's probably what, and even that probably is not the real thing. I mean, maybe there's nothing at all which can be expressed through language. So when we think about it, that language, it's completely meaningless. We are looking for meaning. We are scientists. We want to know what this or that means. But what if it doesn't mean anything? What if all your collective enterprise is just nonsense? Like, we convinced ourselves that language actually makes sense, and that what we say, there's certain logic, and if we follow the rules of this logic, we'll probably be able to describe what's going on, and we will be able to understand the world, and we may make science and make progress, etc. But what if it's all just nonsense? What if everything we think, we create, all these arts, it has nothing to do with the reality? That's the point, like, between, the problem of the real and the apparent world. What if it has nothing to do with the reality at all? So it's only the one thing we have, our subjective experience expressed through language. And language is completely subjective. Like, there's nothing, there's zero objectivity in language. You may take every word, interpret it in any way. So depending on the context, it will mean something else. Not like you can, again, you can take any word and say, oh, this word, it has certain meaning, and in every context it will mean the same thing. It will, you may find all ways of interpreting certain words, and that's amazing. In the same time, it's, for this enterprise of sciences, when you want to create a strong body of science and make kids memorize all these scientific rules and laws and teach them at school to keep it all in mind, you may not go so far. But anyway, yeah, where was I? Handful, certainly to a whole cartload of beautiful possibilities. There may be even puritanical fantasies of conscience who prefer to put their last trust in a sure nothing rather than in an uncertain something. So sure nothing, like it's complete skepticism. So you say knowledge is impossible. We can't know anything. If there's since everything may be doubted. So if everything may be doubted, the only thing which is certain is that everything may be doubted, or nothing can be stated as truth, as absolute truth. All right, the third sentence, but that is nihilism. Yeah, and basically that's true. Or skepticism. And the sign of a despairing mortally weird soul, notwithstanding the courageous being such a virtue may display. Okay, so basically he compares the desire to have the absolute truth. So this will to truth, he equalizes it to nihilism. Since for him, absolute truth is unachievable. It's, again, it may be always interpreted in different ways. And if you prefer to cancel or all interpretations, if you have nothing, you have nothing. It's nihilism. So you can, skepticism, I guess Nietzsche doesn't use skepticism here, but he says nihilism, right? So you deny the existence of, well, maybe it's not the existence, it's a nihilism on, let's say, epistemological level. It's not nihilism on ontological level, but again, it's like epistemological level here. If you don't know, how can you say anything about anything else? So it may be ontological level as well. So since if you have no epistemology, ontology is also impossible. All right, so nihilism and the sign of despairing, mortally weird soul. So whoever practices nihilism, whoever wants to, the absolute truth, or, not the absolute truth, but, whoever gets to the point where there's no certainty, and you say, okay, let's prefer uncertainty or absolute nothing to any uncertainty. We don't want to talk about uncertainties. We don't want to talk about approximations. We want a truth. If there is no truth, if we can't discover it, let's say there's nothing at all. And there's nothing at all means here despairing, mortally weird soul. So somebody who actually, who can't continue an investigation, who can continue the search, who say, okay, I'm bored, I'm done. There's no way to go on. I tried all sorts of possibilities. I spent 50 years searching for truth. I didn't find anything, and let's say truth is not out there. And it's like he basically talks about Kant here. So Kantian agnosticism, the idea that knowledge is impossible and that our reason is not able to grasp the things in themselves. This idea, like for Nietzsche, represents nihilism and a despairing, mortally weird soul. So you are no longer be able to continue the search, notwithstanding the courageous being such a virtue may display. So in the same time, of course, you may be very courageous, right? You may say, okay, this is nothing but I continue my life. I live and do something. And yeah, I'm facing nothing. Yeah, it's courageous. It's courageous since it's kind of looking at the death's face and being able to, you know, withstand its stare. Since nihilism is death, I guess we may again say that nothing and death are like identical things, even though we have no idea whether or not there is nothing or death. Still, for languages, certainly, like, oh, and again, it's like, certainly, how do we know? How do I know? Am I sure that the experience which I have right now was not a part of the experience of somebody else, like Nietzsche, for example, or any other philosophers? Well, it may be slightly different, but who cares about this slightness? I mean, when you have a realization of something, when you learn something, you have a certain experience, and then you go about your life. But what you do in life, like, you think about it in certain ways, and you may use different words, but essentially, if your understanding of what's going on is, like, let's say, 80% equivalent to the understanding of somebody else who lived before or who will live afterwards, I may say it's the same person. So essentially, I may say that, and finally, you may, of course, generalize and say, essentially, we are all the same person or the same will, as Schopenhauer said. Like, there's the one thing which is there and nothing more. Anyway, let's go on. It seems, however, to be otherwise with stronger and livelier thinkers who are still eager for life. So he says, he basically categorizes, like he puts, he distinguishes two types of thinkers. So those who, like Kant, prefer to admit that there's nothing certain, and it's better to, say that there's, like, if there's nothing certain, I'm not going to talk about opinions. I'm not really interested in opinions and possibilities and approximations. If our reason, logic mind can't find the truth, it's better to say that, yeah, there's no truth. And Nietzsche said they're weaker, like they're weak people. And there are other people, like other thinkers who are livelier and stronger, who want to, continue the search, even though it may be impossible, even though you may understand that it's impossible to find anything. Like, again, that's what makes it really wonderful. So imagine, like, playing chess with it's hard. Imagine playing chess with AlphaZero, like all your entire life. Well, let's suppose that you have a task to play with fucking AlphaZero for your entire life. So you are born. Let's just make a thought experiment. So you are born in a condition, again, made by nature, not by some crazy researchers. So you are born in a condition when you are like what? And well, first of all, you are a genius, let's say. So you have a very strong genetic inheritance, and then nature creates an environment where you develop an interest in chess from the very early age, like from year one or from year two. And then all you do in life, like this behavior, playing chess, organizes your entire life. So it becomes the dominant function of your brain basically thinks all the time about chess, and everything else is just automatized, and you basically accomplish other things without considering them at all. So, well, maybe you do, but again, the essential idea: 80% of your thinking is focused on playing chess, and then, like, at the year two, you start playing with AlphaZero. And let's suppose that somehow you figured out that it's impossible to beat AlphaZero, since no matter how, like, long you are going to live, AlphaZero basically computes much faster, and it plays much more games, and therefore, if there's an endless possibility in chess, again, it's not endless, but well, if you live if you live a million years, probably you'll be able to reach. But again, like alpha zero is always going to be better. And you understand it at each too, but you still continue playing with it for, 10, 15, 20, 30 years, 50 years. And then, you play with real players. So you go to some tournaments and play. The point is, of course, it may be interesting to see how far you can go. It's the point is it's impossible. You know it, but you don't give up. You say, okay, I know it's impossible. I'm going to do something else. But the point is, like, whatever you do is impossible to achieve the final result. So you see, in life in general, any action, anything, what you do, there's no final result. It's always continuing. So you can say, okay, now let's say you have to find whatever your soulmate and make family, and then provide your family with goods, and then die. There's no final result. You can say, okay, marriage is the final result, or having a good job is final result, or retire from your job and have pension and travel the world. There's no final fucking result in life, and you can find it. But some people say, oh, okay, then let's not find anything at all. Let's just stop living. Life is meaningless. Let's just stop it. Since if there's no way to satisfy our will, there's no point to experience anything at all. And I said, no, that's actually cool. There's no way to find final result, but the experience itself brings lots of pleasure and happiness. And probably we have to write, we have to advocate for this experience. So we have to make it richer. We have to make it more profound and intrinsically valuable, instead of just denying life, destroying ourselves, and being, self whatever. Anyway, so two types of thinkers. In that they side against appearance and speak superciliously of perspective. In that they rank the credibility of their own bodies about as low as the credibility of the ocular evidence that the earth stands still, and thus apparently allowing with complacency their securest possession to escape. For what does one at the present believe in more firmly than in one's body? Who knows if they are not really trying to win back something which was formerly an even securer possession, something of the old domain of the faith of the former times, perhaps the immortal soul, perhaps the old God. In short, ideas by which they could live better, that is to say, more vigorously and more joyously than by modern ideas. Okay, now I see I don't have a lot of time. I decided to finish it at 10:20, and it's already 10:14. I'm not going to analyze every sentence. I'll do it later when I memorize the entire passage, the entire paragraph. But I guess, already like by the third three sentences, it's like you may already create a vision of what's going on in this paragraph. And this one, again, he basically describes these livelier thinkers, and he mocks them in some way. So the old God, they want to win old ideas when it was, you kind of believe in something and you don't question it, even though you don't know whether or not it's like, you may have doubts, but you actually try to, you use faith essentially. So you say, okay, let's say faith is what there is. So you don't need to seek for knowledge, since seeking for truth leads to skepticism. If you become a skeptic, you basically become a nihilist. And becoming a nihilist, you come in one category. And again, the point is there are two ways. See, there are two ways. And Nietzsche doesn't say like one way is better and another is worse. He says they are both lead nowhere. They are both stupid. And and try to find the third one. All right. I'm just going to finish reading this. There is distrust of the modern ideas in this mode of looking at things. Oh, Nietzsche actually prefers something. He says, like, you know, life is good. Let's go on. Let's not stop there. Let's try to see how far we can go. There is distrust of these modern ideas and this mode of looking at things. A disbelief in all that has been constructed yesterday and today. Yeah, it's like kind of there's a opposition between liberals and conservatives. So whatever we decided is good yesterday or today, meaning like 100 years ago and 50 years ago, or maybe 500 years ago, depending on where are you in your intellectual development. So there's perhaps some slight admixture of satiety. Satiety? Was it satiety? Forgot the pronunciation. Satiety. Satiety, yeah, that's true. So there is perhaps some slight admixture of satiety and scorn, which can no longer endure the bric-a-brac of ideas of the most varied origin, such as so-called positivism at present throws on the market. Bric-a-brac of ideas, positivism throws at the market. We discussed of the more refined taste at the village fair, motleyiness and patchiness of all these reality philosophers. Motleyiness is kind of a mixture of, motley crowd. I know. Okay, let's say motley. Motley crowd meaning scattered or unorganized. A group of people I think that are very different from each other and do not seem to belong together. Yeah, motley. Village fair, motleyiness and patchiness. Patchiness. What is patchiness? Patchy. Happening or existing in some areas, but not in others. Not complete enough to be useful. Yeah, incomplete. Okay. Like different and incomplete. Oh, see, you miss it different and incomplete, but if you say motley, like motley and patchy, that sounds much better. No, in the speaking club, nobody will be able to understand me if I say motley and patchy, whereas if I say different and what? And what? And not complete, yeah, everybody can understand. But that's like colors. So you basically take any idea and there are 50 shades of every idea which are expressed by certain words. Not just an idea, but any phenomenon in the world, anything. All right, of these reality philosophers in whom there is nothing either new or true, except this motleyiness. All right. Therein it seems to me that we should agree with those skeptical anti-realists and knowledge microscopists of the present day. Their instinct, which repels them from modern reality, is unrefuted. So again, he talks about the first category, like Kant, and those who like nihilists, who say it's better to have nothing than to have everything uncertain. So we're going to look for certainties. If there's no, it's not nihilists. It's exactly those who continue the search. So he distinguishes between skeptics and nihilists. So nihilists, basically, they're, in modern terms, they are agnostics. They say knowledge is impossible. And skeptics, they say, we don't know. It seems there's no truth yet, but we'll probably find out it. Well, at least we are going to continue, we're going to go on searching for truth. And anti-reality, like now, reality and whatever you call realism, all these things, we doubt that they exist independently, but still we go on and search. And it's very hard to put Kant into this category, since Kant was quite aware of, from one perspective, he may be considered as a nihilist in Nietzschean sense. From other perspective, he may be considered as a skeptic. And Yeah, it all depends on how you interpret it. For example, when I read Kant, I would say that, well, first of all, I was kind of, I was an amateur in philosophy at that time. It was 2013, 2014. I was writing about critique of pure reason for more than a month. So I was, first I read this book twice. So once just briefly, I remember one date, it was February, the end of February. I recorded video, journals at that time. And I was talking about it, I was writing about it, and I was actually I worked. I went to a different city to do work in Yaroslavl for 3 days, and in these 3 days, I read the entire Critique of Purism. And then I got back home, and after a month, I decided to read it again. I read it again, and then after reading like slowly, not in 3 days, but maybe in a couple of weeks, and then I decided to go slowly and consider each almost the same what I'm doing right here, but then I didn't have this idea of recording myself and talking about it to the camera and memorizing each paragraph. So I basically was taking a paragraph, thinking about it for probably an hour. So yeah, it was an exercise. So I was thinking about it an hour, trying to understand it deeper. And next day I added more and more and more to that. But finally, when I realized that I know already everything about things in themselves, and it happened, I guess it happened very fast. I don't remember how many exactly paragraphs, but probably I wrote like 30 pages with Kantian, no, with links to the Kantian theses or paragraphs and my extra thoughts, and I tried to reinterpret them in my own way. So the idea was, I read the paragraph, I analyze it for an hour, and the paragraph it's even shorter than this one. I analyze it for an hour, and then I sit down and spend another hour writing my own thoughts, trying to put it in my own words. And I wouldn't say like my understanding of Kant was quite different. So I wouldn't place him in a certain category. It's like say Kant was leftist or rightist or whatever. No, he understood both sides, and probably not just both, but he has an understanding of 3, 4, 5 sides. And his preferences, it's very hard to judge that he had certain preferences, and he changed his ideas throughout his life as well. So if we take earlier Kant, he's one guy. If we take an old Kant with his categorical imperative, he's another guy. But anyway, okay, I have just a few minutes to finish. Therein seems to me that we should agree, with those skeptical anti-realists and knowledge microscopists of the present day. Their instinct, which repels them from modern reality, is unrefuted. What do their retrograde bypaths concern us? What do their retrograde bypaths concern us? The main thing about them is not that they wish to go back, but now it's like it's pure travesty. The main thing about them is not that they wish to go back, but that they wish to get away therefrom. A little more strength, wind, courage, and artistic power, and they would be off and not back. Okay, that's it for today. I think it was quite fun. At least I experienced it. At least as I experienced it, it was very fun for me. Yeah. I'm not sure about the next week, since I'm not sure when I'm going to actually be able to memorize this paragraph. I hope I'm going to be able to do it, like not today. Or maybe I try today. Why not? The point is, like yesterday, as I said, I finished writing this poem, and I memorized this poem as well and repeated it 3, 4 times. And I decided that I want to present this poem at the next speaking club. So I'm gonna, talk about it. I'm gonna recite the poem, and I want to prepare some kind of, it's very funny. And for this, I need to practice this poem for the rest of the week. I have to repeat it 2, 3, 4 times a day in order to make it in order to not just memorize it, but prepare it and deliver it in a special way. And obviously, if I spend now a few more hours memorizing this paragraph, and then I'll have to repeat it, and it'll take whatever energy from another endeavor. So I think maybe I'm not sure exactly what I'm going to do here. So maybe next week I even miss the studying stream, but I hope I'll be able to, probably if today and day after tomorrow, today, tomorrow, and day after tomorrow, like till Friday, if I memorize the poem well, and if I'll be confident that I know it already well and can recite it in a certain way, I'll probably take time and memorize this passage and dedicate a few days to working it out. And then again, I don't want to start a new studying stream unless I memorize this passage. And I want to memorize everything, repeat it from the beginning to the end, not with the preface. I'd like to omit, and probably I'd like to no, the first chapter. So I'd like to start the first chapter, and until I'll be able to memorize the entire first chapter, I'd like to repeat it at the beginning every time. So take it, build more and more like on what I already have. Since I'm very curious how far it may lead me if I just memorize the entire chapter, it basically strengthened my ability to pay attention. It strengthened my memory seriously. And I'm talking now about like not general memory. I don't even know how to describe it, but there's some superficial ideas about short memory, long-term memory. I'm talking about basically some sort of linguistic memory. So I could easily remember things in Russian language. So for me to remember like not an hour, in 2013, for example, I could remember the entire poem by Turgenev, Parasha, and it was long. Like to recite it, it took me 40 minutes when I was confident and when I did it fast. So 40 minutes, I don't know how many. Maybe it was like 20 pages or something. And yeah, but in English at the same time, I tried to memorize Shakespearean monologue, Hamlet monologue, and it took me 2 weeks to memorize just one. How many 50 lines. And the more I study English, the better I see like kind of linguistic memory. My linguistic memory in relation to English gets stronger. Again, in 2015, I tried to memorize some songs, and I wouldn't say it was hard, but still, it wasn't as easy as it is now. Since now I can take this passage and memorize it in an hour, maybe in an hour and a half. And after a certain amount of repetitions, like if I repeat it every day for 5 minutes essentially in the morning and 5 minutes in the evening, eventually in 1 week I know it well and may recite it whenever I want. And the point is, if I extend this and will be able to memorize the content which I may recite for an hour, like how would this enhance my memory and attention and imagination? But anyway, so I've done for today. See you next time. Bye bye.